Welcome back to the Illumination Lectures by myself, Ralph Ellis. Again, extracted on this occasion from the book Cleopatra to Christ, which is the first in the King Jesus Trilogy. Last time, we looked at the ancestry of the biblical family and discovered that they have a sort of an Egyptian and Parthian heritage, mixed with some Roman, Greek, and a bit of Israelite ancestry as well. And that makes for a very, very well connected and powerful royal family, of course, but perhaps a confusing belief system. And we'll continue looking at that religious confusion today, because today we're looking at Jewish zodiacs. So, did you know that the primary symbol of early Judaism was the zodiac? And if not, why not? We were talking much earlier about the role of academia and how they don't necessarily tell the full truth in their education and their television series. I call it lying by omission, because they don't exactly say something doesn't exist, but they forget to mention it, and therefore the wider public don't know anything about it. And here is one of those topics, the zodiac. Who knows that the primary symbol of ancient Judaism was the zodiac? So here is one of those zodiacs. This is the Beth Alpha zodiac at Bet Shean, which is just to the south of Lake Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. And okay, it's a little bit naive in its simplicity, but nevertheless it is a zodiac. It has Helios, the sun god, in the center, drawn by a chariot with 4 horses. It has the 12 signs of the zodiac around the perimeter. And then in each corner we have the symbol of each season. The signs of the zodiac are named. You can see the names there on each constellation. And the names are actually the names of the month. So within Judaism, obviously, the month name was the constellation name. It's rather like us calling December Sagittarius or something of that nature. Okay, so that's an interesting zodiac, but quite simplistic, you might say. But the next one we're going to look at is the Sephoris zodiac. And here it is. And this is to the southwest of Galilee, just to the west of the Beth Alpha zodiac that we just looked at. And this is a much nicer zodiac, as you can see. So it's about 8 meters wide. It's quite large, actually. It has Helios, the sun, on his chariot in the center. It's orientated slightly to the left, so you'll have to sort of look a little bit sideways on there. The horses are at the right-hand side, and the head of Helios is on the left-hand side as you look at it. Surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac, and we have the months again in each corner. So the layout is the same as the Beth Alpha zodiac, but this is just a much finer zodiac. Look at the craftsmanship on this one. It's probably one of the best mosaics from this early era. It's just a shame that it's being damaged quite so much. But, you know, it's been in the ground for 2,000 years, and no doubt people have looted a lot of the stones for use elsewhere. Just below this, you can't see it in this particular image, there's a dedication to someone who actually, paid for this zodiac. And the dedication says, "May he be remembered for being good. Udan, the son of Isaac, the priest, and Pagari, his daughter. Amen, amen." So, yes, we know these are Jewish zodiacs because just out of scene, you can't see it on here, but we have the other accoutrements and symbols of Judaism. So there is the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah candelabra, the shofar horn. All of the symbols of Judaism are here on this zodiac. Nevertheless, we have a zodiac in the center, which is, you might think, rather unusual for Judaism, because you don't see zodiacs within modern Judaism. So perhaps we should qualify this by saying that this was a symbol of Nazarene Judaism, or perhaps Galilean Judaism, rather than Orthodox Judaism. We tend to think of Judaism as a single religion, but of course in this era, we're talking, between the 1st and the 4th centuries, there were many different sects of Judaism. Josephus mentions at least 4. He has the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essene, and what he calls the 4th sect of Judaism, which is not mentioned very much. And he doesn't actually name who they are, but we can guess that the 4th sect are actually the Nazarene, who are mentioned in the Gospels, and they're mentioned in the Old Testament, and the Galileans. In fact, both of those are mentioned in the New Testament, but they're sort of obliquely mentioned. It's not obvious that there are 2 extra sects of Judaism, but they are intimately connected with the Gospel story, because Jesus was called a Nazarene in Matthew 2:23. And the Nazarenes were Egypto-Israelites. Remember, in the last lecture we heard that the biblical family were linked into Egypt, and Jesus went to for his education into Egypt. And therefore the Nazarene Judaism has a sort of Egyptian sort of flavour to it. And in addition to that, of course, that all of the Israelites were linked to Egypt. They came out of Egypt. That's where they came from on their exodus. And Josephus Flavius actually says that the Israelites were the Hyksos Egyptians themselves. And we'll look at that in a later lecture. And it's just quite obvious that 1 or 2 sects within Judaism, within the 1st century, had kept some of these Egyptian beliefs, and therefore we have this veneration of the zodiac. But even then, you might say that the depiction is fairly odd, because look at this zodiac again. The central depiction is of, well, let's look at the general zodiac to start with. And it's full of idolatrous images. And this goes against the primary tenet of Judaism. I think it's the 2nd of the 10 Commandments. You must not make any graven images. And here we see 12 plus the center plus the corners. So we've got, how many is that? We've got 17 idolatrous images on this zodiac, plus all of the images that are slightly off this image and you can't see them. So the zodiac is heretical in itself, because it contains all of these idolatrous images. And then we have Helios at the center, the Greek sun god. Now, why would we have a Greek sun god on a Judaic zodiac? Well, he's not very visible on that one, is he? So let's have a look at the next zodiac, which is the zodiac at Hamat Tavera. And here it is. And you can probably see the zodiac a little more clearly here. So this is Hamat Tavera. It's a zodiac on the Sea of Galilee itself, just below Tiberias. So again, in the Galilee area, it's obviously a favorite region for having this sort of symbolism within Judaism. And there we see Helios in the center, again surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac and the seasons in each corner. But why Helios, the Greek sun god, in the center? It seems a bit incongruous, really. Well, really, bearing in mind the Egyptian heritage of this royal family, this biblical royal family, it should really be the Egyptian flying sun disk in the centre, the image of the Egyptian sun, the flying sun disk. And we're going to see lots of those later because they do appear a lot within Judaism and within Christianity as well. In fact, it's one of the primary symbols of Christianity, if you know what you're looking for. But this is Greek. But remember that this family came out, we saw in the last lecture, this family came out of Parthia, Persia. And the Greeks had conquered Parthia back in the 3rd century BC with the campaigns of Alexander the Great. And so this family are just using the Greek imagery that they're probably familiar with, the imagery that came out of Parthia. And remember that most of Syria and Judea was half Greek anyway, because of the again the campaigns of Alexander and the Seleucid Empire that controlled that region was Greek. And so they've merely used the Greek imagery for the sun god. But let's look closer at this zodiac, because it is interesting and it holds within it a lot of interesting hidden information that is not mentioned anywhere else. I have to say, if you're going to read a history of Judea, you probably won't even see this zodiac. It won't even be in that history. And even if they did print it, they're not going to tell you all about it, all of the information that you're going to get here and within my books that mention this particular zodiac. Because most of the academics, historians, and theologians who investigate these topics don't even know about this. So you're certainly not going to get this information from them. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about what this image actually displays. And if we look at a close-up of this imagery, we will see that Helios, the sun, is holding a blue-green spherical earth in his gravitational grasp. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because it indicates immediately to us that the designers of this zodiac knew the heliocentric model of the solar system. We have Helios holding the Earth in his gravitational grasp. And the Earth is actually a sphere. It's quite obvious, it's not just a circle, that is a sphere. And that when looked at from space, the Earth looks a sort of blue-green colour. Now, that's quite remarkable, quite remarkable knowledge for this era, because this is long before Copernicus, of course, in the 16th century. And Copernicus is often credited with realizing that we have a heliocentric model of the solar system, that the sun is at the center of the solar system and the Earth rotates around the sun. But this was obviously known long before the era of Copernicus. So Copernicus was simply copying from old text. He wasn't inventing anything de novo. It wasn't a new invention for that era. And if we look at this zodiac again, we can also see that the designer knew about precession, the precession of the equinox. So what is precession? Well, it's the slow wobble of the Earth, the same as any gyroscope, and here is a gyroscope precessing. This is the precession of a gyroscope. It's that wobble on its axis. And the Earth does exactly the same thing. It's a gyroscope and it wobbles on its axis. So let's have a look at an image of the Earth, and it takes a while for it to actually go through its rotation. But this should go through its rotation and show you how the Earth wobbles on its axis in exactly the same fashion. And this has an effect because it causes the constellations of the zodiac to move every 2,140 years. So every 2,000 years or so, you get a new constellation rising at the vernal equinox, the spring equinox. And that is precession. And that is useful because we can use this change in the stars to date events and to date monarchs. So it's a very useful tool within archaeology and history to date the era we're talking about. And we can use that for this zodiac. So archaeologists say that this is the 4th century zodiac because when they were doing excavations in this region, the artifacts that they found that were associated with the zodiac were 4th century. And so they dated the zodiac to the 4th century. But of course you can't date stone and you can't date mosaics directly. And so they are just presuming that this association between these artifacts and the mosaic itself. But I think they're wrong, because we can date this mosaic via precession. And if we look at this picture of the zodiac again, you will see that the head of Helios, the sun, is pointing exactly at the conjunction between Aries and Pisces. So it's pointing at a particular date because this is a precessional zodiac. And the date it's pointing at is quite accurately about AD 10. That is the date when Aries turned into Pisces, according to precession. AD 10. And that can be encoded within any sort of text or symbolism that you're using. And that's why Jesus was born as a Lamb of God, but became a fisher of men, because he was born under Aries, but became a king of Pisces. So that we know Jesus was born around the era AD 10. To quite a specific, plus or minus 10 years or so. To quite an accurate degree, we can tell when Jesus was actually born and obviously later became a king. So, if the head of Helios is actually pointing at the conjunction between Aries and Pisces, then this zodiac is indicating that it is a 1st century zodiac. And this is confirmed by Josephus Flavius, who is Judaism's greatest historian, as we've said before. And Josephus Flavius was the army commander in control of Galilee, the very region where this zodiac resides. And he tells a tale about himself, Josephus Flavius, being sent by the Jerusalem priesthood to destroy the images, the idolatrous images of animals, at a location 4 furlongs south of Tiberias. And of course, if we go 4 furlongs south from the ancient gate of Tiberias, we come to this zodiac. And the name he gives for this zodiac, I go through this in the book, so if you read this particular section, I think is in the book King Jesus. Anyway, it's in the next book. But if you read that book, you will find that the name he uses for this village that he goes to is the same as Hamat Tavira. The name he gives means the hot springs. And Hamat Tavira means the hot springs on the Sea of Galilee, Tiberias. It's from Hamat that you get the Turkish hammams. The hot baths have borrowed the same name. So the original name is actually an Aramaic name, hammam, meaning the hot springs. So Josephus went to destroy this particular zodiac. But he was thwarted by the governor of Tiberias, who was called Jesus Ephias. who is said to have been, by Josephus again, who is said to have been the leader of a tumultuous, a seditious band of fishermen. Now, which Jesus in this era was the leader of a seditious band of fishermen? This has to be a reference to the biblical Jesus. And that brings with it some chronological problems, which we'll look at later. That's part of the chronological chasm that we've seen once before. But anyway, Josephus Flavius was going to destroy this synagogue in which this zodiac lay, and Jesus burnt down the synagogue in order to prevent the symbols of animals being discovered and therefore people being arrested and people being tried and killed and all the rest of it. So they burnt down the synagogue. And this was in the 1st century, of course. This was about AD 50 or 60. No, it'll be in the AD 60s. It will be in the AD 60s. So did that zodiac get destroyed at that time? Well, these zodiacs are very expensive. It's probably more expensive than the actual synagogue it resided within. So I've got a feeling that perhaps Jesus didn't want this zodiac to be destroyed. And so perhaps they covered it up with sand or earth and then burnt down the synagogue on top of it to preserve the zodiac in the ruins, so that at a later date this very zodiac could be resurrected within a new synagogue. And this is the synagogue that the archaeologists discovered and determined to be the 4th century. But it wasn't. It was a 1st century zodiac because the image of Helios points exactly at the beginning of the 1st century. Interesting, isn't it? So I like this synergy between history and archaeology. Here we have a story by Josephus Flavius about him going to destroy a zodiac. And here is that very zodiac. You can go and see it today. It's still on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, the very same zodiac that Josephus tried to destroy. And here it is. It's quite amazing, isn't it, that it still lasted after all that time and we know exactly its history and what happened to it. And it was preserved in a later synagogue. And obviously that synagogue was destroyed in a later era, but the zodiac still survived. There's one other zodiac we want to look at in this section. And that's the Huqoq zodiac. So remember in one of the talks, I think it was one of the first of the talks, I spoke about the Huqoq mosaic, which had the mosaic of Alexander, the elephant mosaic. But it wasn't Alexander at all. It was a guy called Bar Kamsa who was the leader of the Jewish revolt. The academics had got it wrong yet again. They had identified this mosaic as portraying the wrong person. Well, Huqoq, well, that comes from the west of Galilee. So we're in the same location again. This comes from just to the west of Galilee, which was obviously a hotbed of Nazarenes, because here again we have another zodiac. And I didn't even know this zodiac was there, because they've been releasing these images very slowly, bit by bit. A lot of this is being controlled by the media. The media pay for the images, and therefore they won't release the images until a certain date when the media are happy to let this story roll. And so these images have been coming out very slowly in magazines like National Geographic and so on. Anyway, they've just released this new image, and this is a part of the same mosaic we've seen before. So in that previous talk, we talked about the Tower of Babel mosaic, and you can see it at the bottom here. So the bottom image is the Tower of Babel, and we spoke about that in the talk. But if you look towards the top, you will see the remains of a zodiac. Unfortunately, it's been rather battered and destroyed, but there we go. But in the centre, slightly to the right as you look at it, you'll see the 4 horses of the chariot of Helios. And then in the circles going around, you'll see 1 or 2 of the signs of the zodiac. And this sort of confirms that this was a Nazarene location. I said before in the talk that I thought that this synagogue, because this is another synagogue, at Huqoq must be a Nazarene synagogue because of the symbolism it contained, because it contained the image of Bar Kamsa, who would have been a Nazarene commander and hero. And therefore it should be a Nazarene synagogue. And here again, we suddenly see a zodiac. And these zodiacs seem to be linked to the Nazarene sect of Judaism. It certainly wasn't a part of classical Judaism, because the Jerusalem priesthood sent Josephus Flavius to go and destroy the zodiac on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. So, that's the Sea of Galilee and the hotbed of Nazarene Judaism there. But in a later book, and again we'll come on to this later, but in a later book I say that these Nazarene Galileans were also based in northern Syria and in Palmyra. Palmyra is the desert city out towards the northeast of Damascus in the Syrian desert. And that, I say, was also a hotbed of Nazarene Galileans. And remember again that Jesus was called a Nazarene, and he was called a Galilean within the New Testament. And here at Palmyra, we have another zodiac, which just shows you how common these zodiacs were. And here is a lithograph of the mosaic. The zodiac. This is not a mosaic. This is actually a sculpture. This is the ceiling beam of the Temple of Bel at Palmyra. And what do we see here? Well, in the center we have the 7 planets. Of course, in this early era, there were only thought to be 7 planets. So in the center we have Jupiter, surrounded by 6 other planets. And around the planets, you can see the 12 signs of the zodiac. And this is carved into a giant monolith. This is a huge, great piece of sandstone, which measures about 4.3 by 2.5 meters. So it's a huge piece of sandstone, probably weighs about 60 tons or so, which was placed in the ceiling of the Temple of Bel as a single roof piece, which is quite a marvelous piece of building and architecture to get this enormous great stone on top of the temple. And here's an actual picture, because I did visit this site back in 2008, I think it was. Here's an actual picture of it. And unfortunately, this zodiac and this great monolith no longer exists, because it was blown up by ISIS in, I think, about 2015. They blew it up, which is an absolute crime against humanity. But, you know, the Neanderthals of ISIS, they don't like, rather like Josephus being sent to destroy the zodiac on the Sea of Galilee, they don't like idolatrous images either, and they certainly don't like anything that's connected to any other religion. So the Temple of Bel had to go, and so they blew it up. And so this temple, which was probably in its era the most expensive temple in the whole of the Roman Empire, was all blown up by ISIS. Very, very sad day for humanity that people like this still exist in the world. It really is a crime. So that was, again, 1st century, because the Palmyra temple was built in... Palmyra was founded in the 1st century. The Temple of Bel would have been built, within the late 1st century, going into the 2nd century. So again, it's quite an early zodiac. And again, linked with Judaism, because the Nazarene and the Galileans were in Palmyra, as we'll see later. But the last zodiac I want to explore here is the Bet-Shean zodiac. So in the same location as the Bet Alpha zodiac that we saw before, but in a different temple, as it were, because this is in a 6th century, so we're talking a bit later here. Lady Mary Monastery. So this is a Christian church or cathedral. And therefore, they've changed the zodiac slightly to suit Christian sensitivities. And here we have what you might describe as a calendrical zodiac. So the overt zodiac constellations in the previous zodiacs we've seen have been replaced by the months of the year. And they have Latin names. You can probably see them. If you look in the sort of 3 o'clock position, we have Octobrios and Novembros, or Noembros. So it's a bit of a strange mixture here. It's a Latin name, but written in the Greek alphabet for some strange reason. But anyway, I suppose this region was Greek because it was a part of the Byzantine Christian Empire. So the text that they would have used, the alphabet they would have used, would have been Greek. So now we have the months of the year instead of the constellations of the zodiac. But of course, within Aramaic, they were using the same names for the zodiac and the months anyway. So in Aramaic terms, nothing has changed. They're just using months as the names for each sign of the zodiac. And looking again at this zodiac, Helios, the sun, has changed somewhat. So now we have Helios and Selene, the sun and the moon. So now we have 2 characters at the center of this zodiac. So that's a little bit of a change. But do remember that this is a Christian cathedral. So here we have a man associated with the sun, surrounded by 12 other men. Isn't this symbolism of Jesus and the 12 disciples? This is, of course, where the symbolism of the 12 disciples came from. It came from the zodiac. The disciples are equivalents of each sign of the zodiac. And so that's what they've designed here. They've got a Jesus character surrounded by his 12 disciples, who are the signs of the zodiac. But remember that this is the Lady Mary Monastery, and the Jesus character in the center is now joined by a female character, Selene, the moon. And this just has to be Jesus and Mary surrounded by the 12 disciples. So the woman depicted here is actually Mary. And this wouldn't be Mary the Virgin, this would be Mary Magdalene, because this is a cosmic syzygy, they call it, a conjunction, a solar marriage, a marriage between the sun and the moon when they have an eclipse. It is a marriage between these 2 solar bodies. And here we have a marriage between the Jesus character and the Mary character, between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It's an indication that this Christian monastery knew that Jesus and Mary were married, and they had their 12 disciple constellations. And we'll come across this symbolism in later talks on many occasions, because it occurs on many occasions. It was adapted, well, the zodiac has been adapted to suit each era. We can see it was adapted from Judaism. It's now been adapted into a Christian format. But it gets adapted again as we go into the medieval era. And I go through this in the Grail Cipher book, which we'll look at later, where it becomes the central component of our Arthurian legend, which is the zodiac. And we'll explain why that is. I don't want to spoil the story somewhat. I'll explain that later. But this zodiac and the two characters in the center become a central component of Arthurian legend as well. So this symbolism lasted well into the medieval era. And it's only in recent centuries, really, that this symbolism of the zodiac has disappeared from Judaism and it's disappeared from Christianity. But you can see that it was an ancient symbolism of these ancient religions. So, in summary, we're coming to the end of this particular lecture. So, in summary, the central symbolism of Nazarene and Galilean sects was the zodiac. And Jesus was, of course, a Nazarene and a Galilean. It says so in the New Testament. And these zodiacs were quite complex because they encoded within them the intricate knowledge of orbital mechanics, of the heliocentric solar system, and of precession as well. And as I said before, this knowledge lasted well into the medieval era. So it's an interesting piece of hidden history, hidden religious history that you won't see in any standard text on this region or this era. So that's the end of this talk. In the next lecture, we'll be exploring the history of Saul, St. Paul. And some of you might think that Saul is relatively unimportant. He's not exactly highlighted within church theology. But it was Saul, St. Paul, who created a new type of Judaism, Judaism for Gentiles. I call this new Judaism simple Judaism, but most people today call it Christianity. So join us again for the next Illumination lecture, where we explore the foundations of modern Christianity.